Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the ReFounded Project podcast. This is Zach Paula, and today I had the privilege of sitting down and talking to Walter Key. Walter is a real estate professional in Central Virginia. He also served in the United States Navy for 21 years. Most of that time was in the intelligence community. Walt is very knowledgeable in all things finance, and I've been keeping up with his Facebook post and his new YouTube channel quite a bit the last few weeks as we've had this kind of cryptocurrency buzz that's been in the mainstream media. I've learned a ton just from watching his YouTube videos and his posts, and it was really nice to have him on the podcast and talk about something that we all care about and use every day, which is money. And I know for me, I was never really taught about finance and investing in school. I think most people probably share that sentiment. And so it's good to seek these people out and hear what they have to say. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm definitely going to have him back on because, again, just like what we're dealing with the real estate market right now, the cryptocurrency market right now, it will change. And I would love to get his opinion in the future on market trends going forward. So I hope you get as much as I did out of this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Walt.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, Walt, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for taking some time on a Sunday to do a podcast with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, man. So, podcast usually audio. I'm sure you'll be able to splice this and do your thing with it. So, hopefully, this works for what you need.
Yeah, so this will be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and then YouTube. And so YouTube will have our faces on there, our mugs on there,
Right on.
but everything else will just be audio only.
The audio. Dig it. Yeah, shoot me the links whenever we wrap. That'll be awesome.
Okay, yeah, man, for sure. So typically, I know I sent you a couple things I wanted to talk about in the financially, but I do have a couple icebreaker questions just to get our brains working this morning. All right.
Makes sense.
So, what is your favorite childhood memory?
Oh man, I don't know if I can say that memory on in the public. So I grew up really poor.
Okay.
And by really poor, I mean like we were white trash dodging landlords for most of my upbringing. And the only toy I ever remember playing with, I remember it so distinctly because I stole it from Walmart, following an example of an older sibling who was doing some bad stuff, and I just was along for the ride.
Yeah.
And they got caught shoplifting at the exact same time that I was stealing this cap gun, right? I'm like 9 or something like that. And we got taken home in a cop car. Walmart security busted my sister and her older teenage friends. And here I am, like, I'm scared to death. I'm 9 years old. I got a cap gun hiding in my waistband at Walmart. And the cops are like holding us in the security room of Walmart. They call the actual cops. We get sent home in a squad car. My mother is there with those big, thick, like 1-inch thick paint stirrers. And, back in that day, right, from the squad car to like the sidewalk, and the beating commenced because all she knows is her daughter just got caught shoplifting. And so she's just setting it right, like discipline, right? That's not how we do business. And the cop, of course, at that time was like, ma'am, you have a nice day. Like it was being taken care of. And so that was it. He drove away, nothing else. And I just remember, here I am, this 9-year-old boy, and I didn't get caught, but I'm certain that they're going to catch me, right? They're going to go back. They're going to review all the footage. Like this is a CIA movie about to play out, right?
Yeah.
And in a day or two, they're going to come knocking on our door for me. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? And so I run inside the house and I drop this cap gun behind my dresser. Like I'm 9. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And I'm just certain they're coming back for me. Like I'm not going to get away with this. And after about 2 or 3 days, my 9-year-old brain starts thinking, maybe I'm in the clear. Maybe it's safe. And I played with that cap gun. That was like the only toy I ever played with as a childhood memory. So not really necessarily a good memory, but certainly a fun one because it's still to this day, my adult sister, she's a real estate agent out in Jacksonville now. We still joke about that, how she got caught and I didn't because I was smarter. I had nothing to do with it. Smarter. I just dumb luck as a 9-year-old boy.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Yeah. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Oh man, lack of commitment.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty principled guy. So I like to say, this is what we're going to do and just get after it. And so I don't like wishy-washy. I don't like, well, maybe we could kind of. I think that's one of the things that actually, as we get into the finance conversation, that's one of the things that hold most people back from success in any endeavor.
That's what I was going to
Is
say, especially like small business.
they do not commit. They are, there's this conversation about what's motivation versus discipline, right? Motivation feels good. Ooh, hoorah, let's go do this thing. But discipline is the staying power that gets it accomplished. And so
Right.
a lot of people will get motivated and then they'll lose that motivation very quickly. Those that can hold the discipline and be committed to whatever it was they're trying to accomplish are the ones that are very successful. So I'm not a
Yeah.
big fan of wishy-washy.
Yeah. The inspirational music isn't going to be on in the background when you're waking up at 5:30 to do something. It's discipline that's going to actually get the job done. Motivation comes and goes. It's fleeting.
Exactly.
I like that. What's your morning routine? I know you told me you were a morning person. What's your morning routine look like?
Yeah. So I get up, I pride myself on getting up earlier than most of the world, right? That's part of that discipline approach for me. Yeah, it helps at 21 years in the military, right? We get up pretty early. So my alarm clock goes off on any given day in the 5 o'clock hour, even now that I'm officially retired from the Navy. And I find that I can just get up, work out, get a nice healthy breakfast. I eat oatmeal, banana, and black coffee every morning for breakfast. That sets my day for success. And then I can be on my computer, digging into the market, you're researching investments, doing follow-up from maybe someone, a client of mine emailed me at 9:30, 10 o'clock last night, and I didn't see it because I do have a very rigid do not disturb that goes off on my phone for family time. But I find that between 5:30 and 8:30 or so, when most people are awake for the day, I can be so much more productive because it's quiet. I have no distractions. My phone doesn't ring. My email's not blowing up. And I can just focus on the things I need to do to set my day up for success.
Right. Right. Okay. And then these last two questions are kind of podcast specific. So one of the big things about this podcast is honor. And I actually did not know you served for 21 years. But this will be a great way. So what does honor mean to you?
Yeah, great question. So in the Navy, right, we have what we call our core values, which are honor, courage, commitment. And so for 21 years plus, I lived it, breathed it, taught it. I spent the majority of my Navy career as a senior enlisted leader in the Navy. I made E7 in 2008, and I just retired in 2021. So the bulk of my military career was in leadership. And so we really pushed honor, courage, and commitment. And so, I think everyone has a slightly different thought of what does it look like to them. But generally speaking, I think honor falls back on doing the things that you say you're going to do, right? Living up to a standard. Maybe that's your standard. Maybe that's the Navy's standard. Maybe that's a corporate standard. But holding the standard, even when it's uncomfortable for you individually, you do the right thing regardless of if it's comfortable for you or not.
Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. Great answer. Can you talk about someone you've lost? It can be anybody, and that you think of every day, and how you try to honor them and keep their legacy alive.
Man, what a question. So we're gonna get deep for a minute here. So my early military career, I joined in December of '99, so just a little bit before 9/11. When I was 15, I knew exactly what I was going to do in the Navy, which is pretty rare for most people. I was living in Rota, Spain. My dad's a retired chief. He was working as a contractor. And while living in Spain, I got this harebrained idea that I was going to join the Navy and I was going to become a Navy SEAL. And there was nothing more to it. So fast forward a little bit, we're in Spain. My retired chief dad is a drinking buddy of the master chief at the Special Warfare Unit there. Comes up in conversation that, hey, my son is looking to join. And they gave me what at the time was called a BUDS warning order, which was basically just a fancy piece of paper that says, do these workouts, kick yourself in the teeth for a while, and it'll be easier if you make it. And so at 15, I started working out, training myself to go to Buzz. And fast forward a couple, 2, 3 years, I go to back then there wasn't an SO rate, right? It was source rating. So you had to be an intel guy, you had to be a boatswain mate, you had to be a gunner's mate. And then you could try to go that direction. So I went to Intel A school, and then from Intel A school, right to Buzz. Graduated Buzz, went through SQT, went to SEAL Team 8, did my thing, got married shortly after I got there, realized as much as it was in my mind, this cool guy thing, I like being married more than I like being gone all the time. And so I wound up leaving that special warfare community fairly early in my Navy career, and I did Intel for the rest of the time. But I have multiple names that I think of all the time because I served with people who are no longer here. Chris Kyle graduated in my Buzz class with me. Mike McGreevy was a platoon mate of mine who died in Red Wings. Eric Christensen, who was the task unit commander of Red Wings, was my Buzz class OIC. On and on and on. Danny Dietz was in the class right before me. So the Dietz family is always on my mind. So I have a lot of folks that, even though I left that community, when the news broke of those operations and of those casualties, it hit pretty hard. And there are days where I sit back and I think to myself, could have just as easily been me. Had I stayed in that community, I probably would have been on that bird doing the same thing. And so those are the memories that I try to honor. And I am by no means, the hero that those guys were. I did my time in special warfare. I left. I did Intel. I had a great Navy career. But those are my heroes. And so those are the names that I try to live up to every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. We do tend to get a little bit deeper on the podcast. So again, I had no idea you were a team guy until this.
Most people don't. Now. It's not something I chat about very often.
Yeah, and so I had Greg Hakey and Clark Impostado on as my first 2 guests. Were you at Team 8 when Gary Welt was there? So obviously I knew Gary Welt.
Yeah, no, I don't recall. Well, I was there. I checked in September of 2001. So literally, it's weird how it worked out. I graduated SQT in August, and I was on leave. I was down in Florida visiting my family. I had my wife of now 19 years, who was my girlfriend at the time. I was taking her around, meeting family and doing our thing. Actually, I'm wearing, just shout out to my wife. This is our 19th anniversary today. This shirt is the shirt I was married in 19 years ago. Still fits. Don't ask me how that happened.
Nice.
So here we are. I'm on leave. I'm a brand new guy. I just graduated SQT. I'm not even officially checked into SEAL Team 8 yet. And 9/11 happens. I wake up in Florida at my aunt's timeshare resort, and I'm watching the towers fall. Middle of my leave. And I'm like, okay, well, leave's over. Time to go to work. And I remember flying up from Florida to Virginia. I was like, it's game on. It's time to check in. I got pulled over by a Virginia state trooper shortly after I crossed the state line. I was doing 100 in 55 or whatever it was. And needless to say, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, sir, I'm on my way to SEAL Team 8. I'm a new guy. I'm checking in. I'm sure you saw the news. And he's like, have a nice day. Get out of here. And that was that right set the tone for my command. So I checked in September of 2001. Of course, we weren't knee deep in any of the wars yet. It had just happened. And so we were kind of operating on the original, you go to UCOM, you go to SOUTHCOM. We're not really deep in any, Afghanistan, Iraq wasn't a thing yet. And so we were training up to go do a SOUTHCOM deployment at that time. My platoon was scheduled to go to SOUTHCOM.
Gary might have been at the 18 Delta Schoolhouse. He was an instructor there for a while. So that might have been a timeline there. And so the teams were still geographically differentiated at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting to see the evolution in the teams in the last couple of decades between the geography to, hey, we're just going to pump through war zones, which is, it's kind of cool, right? War is what we do.
Right.
But just so much has changed. The way that they do schooling, the prep that they put into pre-buds now is phenomenal. They're doing so much to essentially try to lower the failure rate. You could argue whether or not it works or not, because there's nothing like buds. Even a prep school is not going to prepare you. But it's great to see the science and the technology that they put into it. The training is so much better now, even than it was 20 years ago.
Right. Okay. So kind of getting into your background, I think it's interesting that you said you grew up poor, as a
Yeah.
child, and now here we are. I'm taking
Yeah.
financial advice from you, right? I'm trying
Right.
to learn from you, and
Yeah.
and you seem very knowledgeable. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about what your childhood was like? I guess kind of what led you to the Navy, and then
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm a mutt, right? Born in Texas, raised mostly in Missouri. About 11 or so, we moved from Missouri to Florida. Shortly after, like a few years go by, my mom marries a retiring Navy chief. We wind up in Europe for 3 years. He's doing contract work. I come back to Florida from Spain because I'm about to be 18, right? I want to get a job and get a license and just you do the things I can't do when I'm an American living in Europe. So I moved back in with my aunt, get a job. Eventually, my parents moved back to Missouri. I moved back to Missouri. I get another job working as a farm hand on 300 acres. And then I joined the Navy. And like I said, at 15, I knew I was going to join the Navy. So it was just kind of a logical conclusion for me. And here's what kind of caused me to wait a smidge. I was in Florida. And now, mind you, I've spent the last several years living with a retired Navy chief, living on Navy bases. I knew how the Navy worked, right? I would, the uncanny ability for me to research what I want to do and know was there already. So I knew exactly what rate I wanted to join. I knew exactly what my career track was going to look like. And I'm in Florida. I'm not quite 18, but I'm almost there. And I walk into the recruiter's office in Florida. And all I did was say, I want to go to Buds. What are the current source ratings? Now, I already knew the answer to that question because I've done all the research. I just wanted to see if anything had changed. And he lied to my face. And he said, "Oh, you don't have to worry about it. There's no source ratings. You can just sign up for whatever." I said, "Okay, thanks, appreciate it." And I turned around and I left. And I didn't go back to a recruiter until I got to Missouri because the guy lied to my face. I'm not dealing with you, right? Where's that honor? He just wanted to check a box and get a quota minute. And so growing up, right, born in Texas, raised in Missouri, we moved around a lot. Uh, when I tell people, born in Texas, raised in Missouri, lived in Florida, lived in Europe, back to Florida, back to Missouri, they'll say, "Oh, were you a military brat?" I'll say, "No, I was poor white trash, dodging landlords." Right? That's how it was. My mother dropped out of high school when she was in the 8th grade. And so that kind of set the tone for, you can imagine the upbringing, right? It's not a sob story. I'm perfectly fine with my upbringing, but if you had a mom that dropped out of high school in the 8th grade, she was married multiple times, boyfriends in between, just not a real stable family life. At any given time, we lived in a rental house with half a dozen of her drinking buddies. And so I, at one point, shared a room with me, my little brother, my older sister, and a grown man in a bedroom because it was just, that's kind of the dynamic we grew up in. It was pretty rough. And that's kind of that same time frame that, my sister was acting out. She's a teenager. I'm a younger brother. And so we got into doing some stupid stuff. So we're just poor. It was what it was. The economic situation didn't, when you drop out of high school in the 8th grade, you don't have a lot of options, right? So I remember even after we moved to Florida, and I'm almost a teenager at that point, my mother always worked the most basic, low income menial jobs. She worked at McDonald's as a young woman for years. She worked in the kitchen staff of a very nice restaurant, but it was the kitchen staff for years because nobody hires you if you don't have, some sort of even a high school diploma, right?
right,
It used to. So it was always basic income. I remember, gym class in junior high and elementary school, when we're stretching on the gym floor, trying not to show the soles of my shoes because they had big Sharpie where it said 50 cents because my clothes were bought at the Goodwill, right? And then one pair of shoes to last the school year. That's just how it was. So that kind of set the tone in a good way and a bad way. So in a bad way, I had no good examples to follow in finance and how to be wise with my money. And so I made a lot of stupid decisions early in my life. But I also knew that I absolutely did not want to find myself in that position. And so eventually I recovered from my stupid and I learned how to do it the right way. And that's really what set my career up for being able to help other people. In most of my Navy career, we have what's called a collateral duty, right? So I'm an intel guy. and that's my focus, that's my job. But then these other side jobs we call collateral duties. One of my collateral duties since like 2005 was what the Navy calls a command financial specialist. And they send you to a school to basically help you teach sailors how to write a budget, the basics of saving and investing and insurance and retirement. And, the basic financial skills that most people just never learn, even in high school, you just don't get that. And so I had made so many mistakes with money early in my life that it became a passion for me to help others not make those mistakes. And so that's kind of what led me into the finance industry. So it was interesting. I used to tell young sailors that would come to me, don't be embarrassed, because I guarantee you I've made every stupid mistake with money there is to make. Every single one of them. Car loans, credit card debt, payday lending cycles. I sold my first house because I didn't want to get foreclosed on, because I bought something I couldn't afford because the bank gave me the money and I didn't know anything. Every single mistake you can possibly make with money, I made it. Thankfully, I made it early, right? So I could learn from those mistakes and then grow out of those mistakes. And now it's just helping other people not make those mistakes is a passion for me.
Yeah, and I think anytime you find a mentor, right, the better the mentor is someone who's made those mistakes that you can avoid as early as possible, right? And that's maybe a good segue into this, So what would you tell your 25-year self today? In regards to wealth?
Two things. One, I would go back and tell my 18-year-old self instead of my 25-year-old self, because that difference in time really does matter. But what I would tell them is quit focusing on the things you want and focus long-term on the things that you're going to need. And that's the number one issue with most young folks is, and it's perfectly rational, right? There's nothing wrong with it. I'm 18 years old. I get a real job for the first time ever. I'm not talking a couple dollars in allowance, right? I have a real job. And for the first time ever, I have money of my own, decent amounts of money. And my whole childhood, I've thought about all these cool things that I might want someday. Now I can buy those things that I've wanted for all this time. And so we get into that cycle of, well, let me just spend this paycheck on that, and let me spend the next paycheck on that. And we never look long-term to see what our money could be doing for us if we just stop spending on little things that we think we want, but in reality, 6 months later, you won't even remember what the heck you bought. And so that's the biggest thing. Think long-term and prioritize your long-term needs over your short-term wants. And that'll do really well. And then the other thing is start early in your investing journey. I'll give you a quick example for all the listeners out there. Let's go back and talk to my 18-year-old self for a moment. I would say, self, it's me. Listen, frick up. I want you to take 10 grand, scrape it together, save your paychecks. I want you to put 10 grand into a quality growth stock mutual fund this year. And if you do that for me, I'll never ask you to invest another dime your whole life. Just when you're 18, give me that one good year, put 10 grand aside. Now, fast forward to my 65-year-old self, that one-time $10,000 investment in a good growth stock mutual fund, when I'm ready to retire at 65, is now worth $1,037,000. And I never put another dime into it after that first 10 years, or that first $10,000. Now, if I wait until I'm 30, because I'm out buying stuff, I'm doing the thing, right? I got a little house and I got too much credit card debt. And what do you know? We got 2 cars, there's mortgage payments, there's car payments. And eventually I realize I'm spending all my money to creditors. I'm not even being able to save it. Let me get my act together. Then you get your act together. Then now you say, okay, well, I'm 30. I should probably start investing. If I'm 30, I take the same $10,000. I put it into the same quality mutual fund. When I'm 65, it's only worth a little over $300,000. The extra $700,000 was compound interest. I didn't work for it a day. I didn't have to do anything except start earlier. Now, you could argue that there's no way you can live on $300,000, right? If I have a great investment and it's pulling a 10% return, 10% of 300,000 is $30,000 a year. Most people can't live on $30,000 a year. But I take that same $1 million because I started earlier and it's pulling me 10%. That's $100,000 a year. I can live on $100,000 a year.
Comfortably.
Literally change the dynamic of your entire retired life simply by starting earlier and letting the compound interest do what compound interest does. Same money, never invested it again, same quality mutual fund. The only metric that changes is time. And the compound interest over time makes you a millionaire.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, I started my Roth IRA this year. Nice. And at 24. And my only thought was I wish I would have started it 2 or 3 years ago.
So I just sat down a little more nerdy here. So I run my business, my real estate business through an LLC, right? So I can assign employees and as I go. And I just started, my daughter's about to be 18. She's 17 right now. My son is almost 17. They both started Roth IRAs this year because they're now employees of my LLC. I make them do some paperwork and I make them do so they earn income. And with an earned income, they can open a Roth IRA. So my 17-year-old and my almost 18-year-old are now investing in their Roth IRAs.
That's fantastic.
I wish somebody would have sat me down to do that for me when I was that age.
Absolutely. And you are self-employed, correct? So you can have a SEP IRA, which I guess we can get into in a little bit.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about that too. So I have my Roth for me, I have my Roth for my wife, and then we have a SEP IRA. Both my wife and I are employees of our LLC, so we contribute to the SEP, which is a great, if you are self-employed and you have a business entity, the SEP really steps, especially if you start late, right? Because our Roth IRAs, we'll get a little bit ahead of ourselves. You're pretty limited on how much you can put into a Roth every year. A SEP you can put substantially more in, so it's a better way to go if you started late.
So how did you get into real estate? Let's tackle that first, because I think real estate's I'm in real estate myself. I work for a small investment company here in DFW. The market's crazy right now. And so I'd love to hear how you got into real estate and then talk about what's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, real estate is something I knew I was going to do for a very long time. But while you're in the Navy and you're bouncing around, I'm here, I'm there, I'm in Japan, I'm in Nebraska, I'm all over the place. It's kind of difficult to start a real estate business when you're bouncing around every couple of years. But let's go all the way back to my early 20s. My very first house I ever bought was in 2001. And it was the one that I wound up selling, so I didn't get foreclosed on because I probably shouldn't have bought a house at that time, but I did. My bank said, oh yeah, you have Navy income. We'll give you this much. And they gave me more than I can afford. And I didn't know any better. So I bought a house. Now, here's the fun part. I bought the house for $102,000. It was a dump. My wife had the vision that I did not. And every weekend I would come home from being gone, doing training, and something else was updated. Front yard, backyard, paint this, new carpet, just her and the girlfriends every weekend doing something to make this house beautiful. And we got to a point where it was either we were so far behind on the mortgage, we either sold the house or we got foreclosed on. And so less than 2 years after I bought this house, we sold it for $127,000. So in 2 years, I made 25 grand on my first real estate investment. Ever since then, I knew that every time I had the opportunity, I was going to buy a house. And so most military folks will be very shy about buying a house because they're like, well, I'm only here for 3 years. I don't know if that's a good investment. Almost every single time I transferred, I bought a house. So I've owned multiple rental properties in Nebraska. I've owned property in Virginia. I own 3 properties in Virginia right now. I've owned property in Florida. Every time the military transfers me somewhere, I buy a new house. And I either buy it knowing that I can force some equity to be able to get a return when I transfer in 2 to 3 years, or I buy it knowing I'm going to turn it into a rental property. And so I buy the right neighborhood, I buy the right school zones, proximity to base, things like that, so that when I leave it, I can turn it into an investment. And so that's how I did it.
This has to be off-base housing, correct, for this to work?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, never lived on base. Literally never lived on base, except for A school, right? You're living in barracks. But yeah, almost every single time I transferred, Japan and things like that, I would buy a house knowing full well that all I was doing is buying a short-term investment that I was going to live in for a while.
Right.
And if you do that, you can absolutely make real estate work for you very well. And so in 2018, I sold 2 rental properties that I had bought in Nebraska between 2011 and 2013. They were great rentals for years, and when I sold them, I had a ton of equity, so we cashed that out and we put it to use.
Excellent.
Real estate. So I knew for a long time I was going to do real estate. It was just a matter of when.
Right. What do you make of this current market? And so like right now in Dallas, we have people who are paying $70K over appraisal value. They're having to bring cash to the table. Houses are getting 100 offers over the weekend, and inventory is obviously super low. And so I've heard, half the people I've listened to say that we're going to have a crash. We're sitting on a bubble. Prices are going to drop. And then there's another half of people like Dave Ramsey, who's like, this is the way it's going to be. It's just going to keep getting higher. So you might as well get into it now. What do you think about the real estate market right now?
I put out, I have a fledgling YouTube channel that I just started. And I literally just recently addressed this topic on there. So I have one of my YouTube videos was 2021 housing market, where we're at and why. Because I was getting a lot of those similar questions from buyer clients. It's like, when are we going to see a crash? When am I going to be able to buy a house and it won't be so competitive? We have a similar market dynamics here. It's everywhere. It's a national problem, really. And so I did this video specifically to address that question, where I compared and contrasted our current market to the 2006 to 2009 market, right? And because I think that's what most people remember. It's like, oh, 2009, it all came crashing down. And so now people see the prices coming up, and so in their mind they just start saying, oh, here we got 2009 again. But it's actually not anything remotely the same. It's a fundamentally different market. And I could spend 45 minutes diving into all of that, or I could just say, take a quick peek at the YouTube video too, but I hit the high points. All of the key metrics, house price appreciation year over year, inventory levels, mortgage rates, equity levels, the difficulty to actually secure a mortgage, they are all drastically different now than they were then. And so it paints a picture of a fundamentally different market. Yes, prices are high. They're going to be high. They're going to stay high for some basic reasons, right? Supply and demand. We have a national inventory shortage everywhere. The lowest inventory we've ever had is within a 3 to 5 week period right now, right? The lowest we've ever seen. In this market, in Central Virginia, we've actually got inventory levels that are lower than that national low. I've got counties that are less than 1 month of supply. So we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing multiple offers in a weekend, listed on a Thursday. We're reviewing offers on a Monday. 20 offers later, they're 15, 20, 30% over list price. No home inspection, no appraisal contingency. Yeah, you name it. We're seeing the same thing. But it's supply and demand. There are a whole bunch of folks trying to buy houses, and there's just no supply for them to buy. That's fundamentally different than it was back in 2006, 2009. Interest rates, despite the fact that they've ticked up a smidge, are still at historic lows. We're just coming off, I think 2.7 was the no kidding historic low that we've ever seen. That was in January of this year. And so we're just starting to scrape above that historic low. So buying power, despite the fact that prices are higher, buying power is actually really strong. And so that's keeping the buyers out there trying to buy still. But there's just not a ton of people selling. And so that's supply and demand. The other piece to this that a lot of people, when they think real estate, they think about those key metrics, but they don't think bigger pictures, are inflation. If you look at the M1 money supply, and so for those that don't follow, Treasury and don't geek out on this stuff like I do, the M1 money supply is a metric of how much money is in circulation in existence now, right this second. January of 2020, the M1 money supply was approximately $4 trillion. January of 2021, that same M1 money supply was $18 trillion. Now that's a 450% increase in money printed into circulation in just 1 year. And we're still printing money right this second to pay for bills that we're still passing. So 450% increase in money in circulation, inflation is going to continue to happen. And so everything that you look at, lumber cost, OSB sheathing, shingles, the cost of gas to run the generators, to run the tools, everything that it takes to buy a house goes up in price. The housing market typically follows inflation very well. So the prices go up, the cost to build new ones go up. We're going to keep seeing prices go up. And it's not an artificial inflation driven by speculation. It's an actual byproduct of supply and demand and inflation.
Yeah, and I guess I was going to ask you this at the end of the podcast, but since we kind of talked about this as a scenario, right? I think people who have a safe, like a nest egg in their savings account, and that they're weighing, do I take money out of savings to put on as a down payment on a house? Am I going to deplete my savings, but I need to buy a house now, or else if I wait 5 years, it's going to be drastically more expensive. How do you weigh how much money you should have in savings as a nest egg versus using that money? Obviously, it's a good investment, right? I mean, hopefully, right? It's a good investment to buy a house. How do you weigh that?
So I tell everybody, because I do a lot of investing, right? I do real estate, I do stocks, I do cryptocurrency analysis, I do a lot of money making things. I've always had the uncanny knack to make money, which is great. I always tell people you got to start with the right foundation, right? And so again, my fledgling YouTube channel, I did a quick video, what I call the Never FOMO wealth building plan. And it was basically start here, and then go here, then go here. And so I always tell people the very first thing you should do before you invest at all, whether it's real estate, it's stocks, it's CDs, before you invest in yourself by paying off your consumer debt. There's no point trying to make 10% returns on a mutual fund when you're paying 18% interest on a credit card, right? That's a losing proposition. So get your money working for you by not paying it out to debtors. So pay that junk off as soon as you can. Get debt free. That's a great way to start. From that, put some money in savings that is truly just a rainy day fund. Depending on who you ask, some people will tell you 6 months of your living expenses is good. Some people will tell you 3. I personally will tell you it depends on your life dynamic. For example, when I was active duty military, my paycheck was pretty darn secure. I didn't have to worry about the Navy saying, hey, we're not going to pay you for 6 months. And so I could get away with a lower savings amount. If you are out in the job market and let's say you're in the restaurant industry, well, that's a risky bet right now, whether you have a job or not, because there's just so much dynamics to COVID and the service industry as a whole. And so I'd say probably lean on the side more towards 6 months as a buffer. But the basics is get that debt paid off and then put some money in savings that you are not investing with, you're not buying real estate with, you are just setting it aside just in case. It's a rainy day fund. It's your grandma's rainy day fund. After you've done that, then you start investing and you buy real estate if you want, you buy stocks, bonds, mutual funds, crypto, whatever you want to do, but don't dive into investments until you've got that foundation set of some savings and that you don't have a bunch of debt that needs to be paid off. Now to your more specific question there about how much money do you put in real estate? Depends on what lifestyle you want, how big is your family dynamic, et cetera. I will say that there's a few things that work in real estate's favor, right? We just talked about the inflation numbers. Inflation is going to get a little bit silly in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years maybe. Real estate has always been a great hedge against inflation. And so if I know my dollar is going to go down in value because we're going to print more, the price of everything is going to go up. Therefore, the value of my home is going to go up. So rather than put 50 grand in savings, earning 0.25% while inflation is 6% and I'm eating away the value of my dollar, why don't I take that 50 grand, buy a real estate property or two, and then let the 6 to 10% market appreciation year over year grow that money while the mortgage is being paid down and I build equity. Now you can do that as your primary if you don't already have one. That's a great way to do it. You can do it as a investment property and let a renter pay down your mortgage if that's the position you're in. But I would tell people don't wait. I am quite certain that prices next year are going to be higher than they are now. and prices in the third year are going to be higher than they are next year. Again, supply and demand, inflation, building cost, nothing we can do about that. The good thing is, if you look at the metric of the percentage of income that it takes to purchase a house right now, compared to say 2006, 2009, it's actually still cheaper to buy a house as a percentage of your income for most people, because incomes have also come up over the past several years. So it's between mortgage interest rates and the purchasing power that most people have based on their income, it's still a pretty good time to buy. It's still a pretty good investment. Even though prices are coming up, incomes have also come up. And so as a percentage of your income, it's actually cheaper to buy a house right now than it was in, say, 2008, 2009.
Yeah, so waiting until the prices come down may not be a good bet, because they just might keep going up year after year.
Exactly right.
What's the good way to get into rental properties? Say you have a house, it's your homestead, you're living there, and you want to start buying more rental properties. I mean, is it as basic as just putting a down payment down, finding renters, and then maybe 5 years later buy another one? Or what would you recommend?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways, right? I was fortunate, I guess you could say I was fortunate. It was kind of, it was just being in the military, you transfer every 2 to 3 years. So I had the opportunity to buy my primary residence every 2 to 3 years. And so I buy a primary residence, I live in it for 2 to 3 years, pay down the mortgage, inflation keeps going up, right? Prices for rent keep going up while I'm living in it. And then when I transfer again, I turn that into a rental, I buy a new primary. And then 3 years later, I turn that one into a rental and I buy a new primary. And so I've had an advantage there, because obviously, the down payment requirements and the interest rates and everything on the primary is a little bit better than investment property. But it really is as simple as 20% down payment is pretty standard for an investment property. So you got to save up 20% of the price point you're looking to buy in, and then buy it, and then turn it into a rental. Now, I will say, not every single property is going to be a good rental investment. You do have to run some numbers, right? There's some basic data points that you want to crunch to make sure it makes sense, so you're getting a good value for your money. And other things like net operating income and cash on cash return and all that good stuff. And again, I did a video on that too. So if anybody wants to dive into that stuff, I just recently put together some videos on how to break down the metrics of a real estate investment to see if it's a good deal. So you got to look at the numbers, but generally speaking, if you buy in an area where you've got good schools, you're in close proximity to jobs, it's a relatively mainstream house, right? Don't buy anything super extravagant. Don't buy anything really wonky in terms of a floor plan. 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, couple bathrooms in the right area. A 20% down payment with these mortgage rates, your mortgage is going to be really low. And in most markets, Central Virginia especially, the rent prices are far out. They're exceeding mortgage rates pretty consistently year over year. So if you buy it now, let's say you break down all the numbers, and after your 20% down payment, you can cash flow a couple $100. Maybe it's a 10 or 12% cash on cash ROI, which is good. Next year, you're probably going to up the rent, which is going to cash flow even better for you. And the following year, you're probably going to up the rent again, so it's a compounding effect. You've got someone else paying down your mortgage, which builds you equity that you can then use for future investments, while they cash flow money into your bank account from the rent. And so there's a lot of metrics you can break down on that one. But yes, it really is as simple as 20% down payment, save it up, buy it on a conventional loan. Don't try to get fancy. Don't try to do any crazy, well, how about a second bridge loan or owner financing? Take the time, save the money, 20% down payment. If you find yourself in a position where you have a good chunk of money, the more you put down, the more you're going to cash flow. So there's nothing wrong with that. And if you get yourself in a position where, let's say you buy a property and a few years later, the market has gone crazy. So you bought it 20% down. So you're already in a 20% equity ratio. And then 3-5 years goes by, you got another 20-30% equity. You've now got potentially 100,000 plus sitting in equity. You can use a home equity line as an engine to fund your next investment if you want. Understand that if you do that, your costs monthly are going to come up, and so your cash flow will adjust accordingly. But as rent comes up, you might be able to absorb the equity by using your cash flow. And it's a nice engine, right? I tell people don't have debt, right? Because you don't want to be out there paying out all your money to creditors. But if you're tapping into the equity on your homes to fund more investments with cash flow, that's a pretty wise use of debt as opposed to credit cards and car payments and consumer loans and all that other silliness that doesn't get you anything in return except interest that you pay to someone else. Don't do that. If you want to be smart with debt and you tap to the equity in your properties to buy more investments, by all means, be smart with it.
Right. And I'm going to link your YouTube in the show notes. And I was actually, one more thing in real estate before we move on to, I think what a lot of people want to talk about is cryptocurrency. But you mentioned on one of your videos, Airbnb. And so I wanted to ask you, like, with your properties that you use as sort of like an Airbnb, how often do you rent those out? What does that look like as far as your cash flow? How does that differ from a traditional long-term rental or even a short-term rental?
Gotcha. So Airbnbs are a little bit more niche, obviously. You want to find something that gives them a little bit of a special flavor, right? You don't just go into the middle of the suburb and buy a 3-2 and say, oh, it's an Airbnb, right? You need to have something that has a draw for the vacation minded. And so, like, for example, in Central Virginia, we have hundreds of wineries and breweries and distilleries, and we have 2 presidential estates within a half an hour of each other. We have the Blue Ridge Mountains everywhere. We have the Shenandoah National Forest. We're 2.5 hours north of Virginia Beach. We're roughly 2.5 hours south of the DC Metro. So all of those folks in busy cities that want to get away from it all come to Central Virginia. So as a byproduct of that, Central Virginia does really well with Airbnbs and short-term rentals. But even then, you're not going to buy a 3-2 in the middle of a subdivision and Airbnb it. You want something that has the right aesthetic, right? Maybe it's a little bit of a cabin in the woods feel. Maybe you have beautiful mountain views, and so that's going to be your selling feature. Someone sitting out on the back with a fire pit, enjoying the view. You need something that you can market to make your Airbnb distinct. Now, the other piece to that is, while the monthly returns can certainly be higher, right? Because let's say I have a long-term rental, it's $1,500 a month. It's always $1,500 a month until I up the rent next year. With an Airbnb, if I'm throwing $150 a night and we got 30 days, in the month, that's $4,500. Let's say I got a 60 to 70% vacancy rate. Well, that's thousands of dollars a month as opposed to $1,500 a month. So the money you bring in can be higher, but it's a lot more work as well. Because you gotta understand that it's almost like a hotel services situation, right? If I have an Airbnb, someone's got to clean it every single time someone leaves, which could be dozens of times a month. If I'm not doing that myself, I got to pay somebody to do that. And so the housekeeper that's in there changing the sheets and washing and restocking supplies and doing those hotel turnover services for me, that's going to eat into the cost to a degree as well. So just like a long-term rental, you got to break down the numbers and see, does it make sense for the size and shape of house? How much do I think I can rent this for? What's my average vacancy rate in this market? And then based on that, how much income do I expect? What are my operating expenses? What does it really look like for my ROI? There is a great website for folks just getting started called AirDNA. And I think it's airdna.co. And you can pop in an address and it will give you the metrics based on the averages in that area of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath Airbnb. What could you expect to rent it for? How much could you ideally get yearly out of it? And that's a good starting point to be able to look at those numbers. And then you got to dive in a little deeper if it starts to make sense. But it is potentially a better investment. But just like anything, you got to run the numbers. How much are you buying it for? How much are your operating costs? Like I have a vacation condo in North Carolina. It's the highest resort, I think, east of the Rockies. It's in a little ski town. And we love it because we actually go and vacation there several times a year. When I'm not there, it's being professionally managed as a short-term vacation rental by the management company. Now, if I bought that right now, I don't think it would be a worthwhile investment because the prices have come up and the ROI is not the same. But when I bought it for a substantial discount to what the current market is. And so it does really well for me. And so it's all about the numbers at the end of the day.
The professionally managed for real estate, how much do you, I mean, again, it's different per market, but as a percentage on ROI, paying somebody to manage those
yeah,
properties.
For long-term rentals, you're usually going to pay about 10% of the monthly rent to a professional management company. That's pretty industry standard. I will say when I was in Nebraska, there's a great management company out there that I worked out a deal because I had multiple properties and they were managing it for less than 10% for me as a discount because I had multiple. Generally speaking, you're about 10% of your monthly rent in management fees for long-term rentals. Most of your professionally managed vacation rental scenarios, like my condo up in North Carolina, or if you're looking to buy something in a resort and there's professional on-site management that they do everything for you. They book it, they advertise it, they clean it. You don't do anything except own the property and collect a check. Those fees are typically somewhere in the realm of 25 to 35% of whatever you make. And so whatever your gross for the month is, they'll pull 25 to 30% out of that and then send you the rest.
Okay. I've always wondered about that because obviously it's going to save you time. But at the same point, you're losing money if you're paying somebody else. So I wanted to get into crypto because I think everybody recently has been talking about that. So for people who don't know, can you explain, what is a cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so it's a little bit geeky. I'll try to keep it simple. So, and again, I had to keep shamelessly plugging my pledge on the YouTube channel, but a lot of folks were asking that question. And so me and a buddy of mine did a collaboration video maybe a month ago. And I just called it Crypto 101, right? It's the super basics of what it is, how it got started, et cetera. So how did crypto get its start? Let's go back to the fall of 2008, right? We're right in the middle of a financial crisis. The housing market is tanking. The banks are about to get bailed out. And so everyone's going, what in the world is going on in finance, right? Something's broken. And on the web, this white paper is published for Bitcoin, peer-to-peer digital currency. And nobody really knows who exactly published it. A gentleman by the name of Satoshi, maybe it's a guy, maybe it's a group of people. Nobody really knows who this person is that actually created Bitcoin. But the white paper hits the street. And the idea was we can viably replace cash with a digital currency. Why not? A couple years later, Bitcoin exists and it's in its form. It's being shared and traded. One of the first recorded transactions where Bitcoin was actually used as money. A gentleman, I think it was 2010, a gentleman says, I will pay someone in Bitcoin to deliver me 2 large Papa John's pizzas. Whoever delivers them to me, I'll pay you in Bitcoin. And this guy said, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do it. So this guy delivers pizza, the dude pays him in Bitcoin, and that established the first value metric of Bitcoin. And I think at the time it was like a quarter per 4 Bitcoin or something like that. So you imagine in 2010 what 2 large Papa John's pizzas cost. Had that guy held the Bitcoin till now, you're talking multi tens of millions of dollars. Well, who'd have thought? Bitcoin has actually been, it's well documented, it's not even remotely disputable. Bitcoin has been the best performing asset in the last decade by far. It has outperformed the stock market, bonds, real estate, anything else that is out there. Bitcoin has far outperformed it. A $500 investment in Bitcoin exactly 1 decade ago would be roughly $35 million right now. Mind-boggling. Yeah, so that's kind of how we got started. Now, Bitcoin is, now we call Bitcoin more of a store of value than a currency, right? It's almost like a digital gold because it's the standard bearer. And we're at a point now where the price is not fluctuating huge because it's such a high dollar amount. So really a lot of people see Bitcoin as a store of value. Now, Ethereum was really the second crypto to exist. There's a couple other smaller ones that are roughly the same time frame. What made Ethereum different is Bitcoin just functions as a currency. It can't really do anything else. And so the creators of Ethereum wrote into the coding smart contracts, which was revolutionary. And so imagine a payment mechanism that allows me to write in all of the legal jargon I could potentially deed my house to you. I could do all of the transaction digitally through the payment. Nothing else has to take place. And so that's kind of what smart technology or smart contracts has come to. So Ethereum built not just a currency with a token, but they built a network upon which now thousands of decentralized applications are layered on top of the Ethereum blockchain network. And so that's why Ethereum is doing so well, and it will continue to do very well, because it literally created an ecosystem for the rest of blockchain technology to pile on. And so there's so many different tokens that work off of Ethereum. There are other dApps, decentralized applications that function on the Ethereum network. But even Ethereum, as cool as it is, has some flaws, right? So the gas fees are a little high right now. It's still proof of work, which is, without getting super geeky, there's proof of work, there's proof of stake. Proof of stake is far better. We've learned that just by the way that it functions. So Bitcoin was proof of work, Ethereum is proof of work. Ethereum is now currently migrating to proof of stake because they've realized it's much better. And so eventually that migration will finish with Ethereum 2.0. And the theory is that the gas fees and the network congestion that some people complain about with Ethereum will essentially be cut potentially down to a 100th of what it is now. And so you have Ethereum fees roughly the same as like Binance Smart Coin, which is far newer and far cost effective way to transact. Ethereum's probably, this is not financial advice. I'm not a licensed financial advisor. Ethereum's probably going to be $10,000 by the end of the year. I don't think any crypto expert would argue that that's not a conservative number for Ethereum.
When you say the one question real fast, when you talked about Ethereum 2.0, is that going to substantially increase the value when it goes from proof of work to proof of stake?
So I think what you'll see, as we typically do in investments, is as that migration nears its completion, right? It's underway right now, and there's multiple phases to it. As those phases near completion, we will see the price come up. We'll see the value rise ahead of the actual implementation. And that's pretty typical, right? Most investments, if a board at a company says we're going to do this thing on this day, the value of the stock typically rises up to that point. And so it gets ahead of itself, so to speak. We'll probably see that with Ethereum. Absolutely will make the system better. It will make the cost to transact on it better. It'll make the time it takes to complete a transaction better. It'll be more secure. It'll be better all around. And so, yes, the value will certainly come up because of that. There's also some other things that they're working on, which is great. But that ecosystem is just so huge. Ethereum's not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, take Ethereum. Fees are high. It's still proof of work. How do we make that better? And so, a co-founder of Ethereum wrote the code and created Cardano, which is probably one of my favorite projects. Cardano was the first crypto to use proof of stake, which is the better system in general. So Cardano's trading, not even a tenth, not even 100th at this point of what Ethereum's trading at. I think Cardano's had a pretty good run in the last day or two. It's sitting in 225, 240 range, which compared to $4,000 Ethereum seems pretty cheap. Now the thing about Cardano is far faster. It's still building a great ecosystem, but it's being built as we speak, whereas Ethereum's ecosystem is huge. And so you could argue, if Ethereum 2.0 is as successful as it is, what do we really need Cardano for? Because they'll be close to the same. But because that's not here yet, Cardano is really coming up nicely because it already has proof of stake. It already has low transaction fees. It already moves far faster. And it's building a huge ecosystem as well. So if any of your users really want to just get a touch of what Cardano is doing, tell them to go to #Cardano Africa and just look into that project. So Cardano is partnering with African nations to literally bank the billions of people in Africa that are unbanked. They have no financial structure. They literally still use a cash system. And Cardano is bringing blockchain technology into Africa for various things, not just financing, but There is the Ministry of Education in Africa is partnering with Cardano to create a blockchain-based student ID that can literally track an education system from kindergarten through college for the same student, and it's all on the blockchain network. All of their history of their education is collected and stored securely on blockchain. It's pretty neat stuff that they're doing. So I'm very, very bullish on Cardano. I think they're going to do some wild things in the future.
And everyone's talking about Dogecoin, and I mean, it's SNL, and I was really excited about it for a long time. I got in at 6 cents, and I took your advice and sold before SNL. It was great, and now I can't tell if Elon Musk is just playing people, tweeting, because if your investment relies on him tweeting, it's not a very good investment.
Right. So here's the thing about Doge. Ironically, it's been around about as long as Ethereum. It's been around for a very long time. Obviously, just recently in the last year is really when it has exploded. And you did exactly the way to do it, right? You got in super early. You saw the run up. You weren't a greedy capitalist so much. You took your money out. That's smart. I will be the first to admit I made a lot of money in Doge. I swing traded Doge multiple times. Never once held it longer than probably a month or two, because I don't see it as a long-term investment. For all the reasons I'll talk about in a second about what makes a good crypto project, I just don't think it is. Now, there's recently been some news that have come out talking about how Elon Musk has been working with the Doge dev team since 2019. Now, you could argue that if he's been working with the dev team since 2019, he probably has some financial interest, stated or unstated, in the success of the crypto, which is why he tweets it like he does, et cetera. But any investment, crypto, stocks, you buy the rumor, you sell the news, which is exactly what you did with the Saturday Night Live piece. The run up was great, and I was telling everybody, you need to be out of this before that airs, and we saw what happened. Right? That's buy the rumor, sell the news. The problem with Dogecoin is, while it is actually inexpensive, it's fairly eco-friendly, the transaction speeds are decent, there's so much circulating supply that for the value to come up substantially, the market cap would have to just dwarf everything else out there, and it's not logical. I just don't see it. Now, you could argue that there's no real use case to Doge. You could argue there's no real use case to Bitcoin other than a currency. Bitcoin's $60,000. That's a little less now. So there are those that will argue that Doge, if it is adopted mainstream as a currency, that's all the use case it needs. The difference is Bitcoin has a far more finite supply and demand than Doge. And Doge is actually, the code is written to produce more Doge tokens every single day. And so it's not like you've got this huge finite supply, but it's going to quickly decrease because they're making more every day. And so supply and demand, right? Even with great demand, if your supply is constantly outpacing that demand, you can never have really great price appreciation. And so, yeah, I made good money on it, right? I think I started swing trading it somewhere when it was sub nickel, and I'm out of it now. I just don't, like, I was telling somebody the other day, right? It's roughly 50 cents. And I recently told some folks, it's probably going to get into a channel and trade in the 50 to 60 cent range for a while until the next catalyst, right? Until the next silly tweet. I'm just, even if it doubles to close to $1 on the next hype, in crypto, it's a whole lot of downside risk for 100% gain. I can name multiple cryptos that I've done more than 100% gain in a month. Now, you could argue it could do it in a couple days. You could just as easily argue it'll lose 100% or 50% in a day or two. And so at this point, based on its price and based on where I think it could logically ever peak out at, the return is just not good enough now for the risk in my mind.
Yeah, and that's why the four that I've tried to get into are based off your posts and your YouTube channel: Ethereum, Cardano, VeChain, and XLM. Harmony. That's what I'm trying to stick with now. And I think, like I said, your video on your YouTube channel does a great job of explaining that. People should listen to it because y'all go very in depth about it. I wanted to talk to you for a second. The value of the US dollar, as we mentioned earlier, inflation, everything's getting more expensive. Your dollar is not worth as much as it's going to be. It's not worth as much in 5 years as it is now. Where do you see crypto in the future of the US dollar? Do you think crypto will ever, because I think part of the thing too is if you have all this money in cryptocurrency and it does go out and you sell it and say there is a real utility for it, well, now you have no crypto because you just sold all of it and it's back into the US dollar. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you're 100% right. Inflation is going to continue to make the dollar worth less. Prices of things are going to go up. And so you want to look at investments that are good hedges against that inflation. And that's investing 101, right? If inflation is going to be high, buy assets that will benefit from the inflation. So real estate is a great hedge against inflation. Actually, the stock market itself is a pretty good hedge against inflation. Just crypto is a great hedge against inflation. And so any of those investments are going to do well while inflation happens. Now, the question becomes, at what point in the future do you say, I think we're at a top for this crypto cycle? And, logically, just like the stock market, there's bull cycles and bear cycles. So if we hit the top, what do I do with all the money I made in crypto? You can cash it out, put it in a savings account, and then inflation will eat it away. Now we've got what's called stable coins. USDT, USDC, a couple others that are out there. And it's a cryptocurrency specifically designed to be pegged to the dollar. Okay, so let's say the bull market of crypto is winding down and I want to cash out my profits and set them in something more stable that I can then use again later when the next bull market comes. Rather than cash out of crypto completely and go dump it in a savings account, you can move your crypto out of your current projects into stable coins that are still crypto. They still will be held within the brokerages, but it's going to be pegged to the US dollar. So as inflation comes up, the coin value will come up with inflation. So that's a great hedge. If you want to stay in the crypto space, that's a great way to do it. The other thing you could do is you could cash out crypto, put it into a real estate investment, and let inflation do what it does. Let a renter pay down your mortgage while you build equity. And then on the next bull market, invest in crypto again. So there's good options there either way. The thing for me with crypto is I always tell people to look at the use case, right? What is the utility of the crypto? What is the potential for mainstream adoption long term? And what problem are they trying to solve, right? If you can look at those projects and you can say this crypto project is designed to disrupt this industry with blockchain, and I could see where they'd be wildly successful. And there's mainstream adoption, there's good partnerships. That's an investment worth putting your money into. There are tons and tons and literally hundreds of little tiny speculative projects that really have none of that. They don't have a goal. They are not looking to disrupt the technology or disrupt an industry and do something amazing. They're just a code written into existence, and they're very speculative. That's not an investment. I'll give you a quick example. One that I just like to highlight because it works well is VeChain. VeChain, they are disrupting the supply chain management industry with blockchain. Now, you could argue the supply chain management system has been fairly antiquated for a long time. It's been doing it the same way for a very long time. There's been little, technology booms within that industry, but essentially the way we track and manage supply chain has been the same for decades. VeChain is taking blockchain technology and putting it into the supply chain management industry. And so they've got partnerships with like Walmart in China. They recently did a partnership, agreement with Salesforce, which is the largest CRM company in the world. They are tracking COVID distribution in parts of China using the blockchain technology. Now, those are some heavy hitting partnerships. That's a company that is looking at an industry with massive use case, disrupting the way that industry works, making major partnerships across the world. That is an investment. And so I'm a big bull on VeChain as well. I own a lot of VET. because of those reasons. I think that one will do very well. And that's why I analyze the projects is they got to have a mission that makes sense. They got to have a use case that is wide, mainstream adoptable. And if you find those projects and you feel like, yeah, I can totally see where this is going, that's the one you latch onto. Now, there is argument that eventually the bull cycle will come to an end regardless. So if you're following that, historically, the cycle has always been, how do we look at historical trends in crypto? And our historical trend is only 2008, 2011 when Bitcoin existed. But from then to now, there have been some very, very, very predictable cycles with, that coincide with Bitcoin halving, and then the run up, and then the peak, and then the bear market, and then the next halving and the run up. And so you could argue that it's relatively easy following that historical trend to time the top of the bull market, within maybe a few days to a week. If you do that, you could argue about when you start pulling your profits off the table. Dollar cost average out, don't dump it all out at once in case you missed it by a week and it keeps running up. But you can start pulling your profits out, maybe put them in stable coins, put them in something else, as you think you're at the top. And if you're not quite at the top, that's okay because you're pulling it out in increments. That's a smart way to do it. Others will argue that because there has been so much mainstream adoption, there are so much in the ecosystem now of crypto. You've got Grayscale Ethereum Trust, right? Mutual fund. You've got Bitcoin mutual funds. You've got Bitcoin index funds that exist now. Canada just started 3 brand new Ethereum, I think they're Ethereum ETFs. I mean, the mainstream investor money going into crypto, many will argue is far, far different than what we've ever seen before. And therefore, that historical cycle may not actually do what it has done in the past. What it has done in the past is massive corrections during the bear market. So even though Bitcoin has been the best performing asset in the last decade, the bear markets have seen anywhere from 70 to 90% drops in value before the next bull run takes it even higher. So you could argue, well, yes, I could wait 10 years and just leave it, but why would I lose 90% of it to have to gain it back? Why don't I just shift it into something stable, wait out the bear market, get back in at the bottom and ride it back to the top? Some say that won't happen because it's just fundamentally different. I think people have said that every single time. My personal opinion is kind of somewhere in the middle. I think we'll still see a top to the bull market cycle and we will see a bear market. I just don't know that we'll see 90% corrections like we used to because there is so much institutional buy-in now. We still may see, 30 to 50, maybe 60% corrections towards the bottom of it. So I'm still planning for the worst, and I'm going to plan to slowly pull money aside into stable coins as I feel like we're nearing the top of the bull market. If I'm wrong, no big deal. I still make good money and I can put it back in. If I'm right, then I've pulled it out and I'll wait out the bear market and then start buying back in when I think it's towards the bottom, which is what you should do with any good investment, whether it's a crypto or stocks. Buy at the bottom and sell towards the top.
Right. And that was actually my last question on crypto was on all these posts you've mentioned the bull market cycle that we're in right now. And how long, I guess my question is, how long do you predict that lasts?
Yeah.
And then that was also a question was what happens if you just keep it in? But like you said, there's no point in losing 90% when you can use that money somewhere else.
Absolutely. So I think in terms of keeping it in or pulling it out, if you invest in really solid quality projects that are not going anywhere, you could leave it. You could just let it ride the bear market and come back up in the bull market. If you're not going to need the money and you have a 10-year time horizon, you could. If you follow the previous, what they call the Bitcoin golden bull cycles, right? And you can Google that. You'll actually see some really great breakouts of the imagery time day for day. It's pretty good data that other people have done. You could argue that the Bitcoin top will be somewhere towards the later part of September, maybe first week of October, give or take a week. Altcoins usually peak out about a month or so after Bitcoin peaks out. So if I'm saying the top of the Bitcoin market is late September, early October, then logically the top of the altcoin market is late October, early November. And so on that, if I'm looking at that time horizon, maybe about a month or two before that, I start pulling about 10%, 15%, whatever you're comfortable with, of my profits in crypto out, and I put them into stable coins that are pegged to the dollar. And if I get to that point and I've pulled 50 or 60 or 70% of my profits off into stable coins, and December or January rolls around and the market's still cranking, okay, maybe we didn't see a bull market, and I can start dollar cost averaging back in to keep riding it. But we'll logically see a slowing down, and we'll start to see that bear market dip. And so what you want to do is dollar cost average out to coincide with most of your money being out somewhere in the realm of, call it Halloween-ish, maybe by Thanksgiving. And then watch the market, see what it does. If it looks like we're in a solid bear market and we do see those prices come down like we thought we would, then it will take a while for the bear market to end. When we think we're at the bottom, we start dollar cost averaging back in, because you don't want to throw it all back in, realize you missed it, and then lose another 20%. You dollar cost average back in, so that's any investment. Again, stocks, mutual funds, dollar cost average is the way to go. As it comes up and it has some peaks and valleys, you're still buying in incrementally, maybe once a week, until you got all your money back in over time, and then you ride that next bull market up. So nobody really knows what it's going to do, right? Because I'm a huge fan of the numbers. I like data, I like historical analysis. But the historical analysis in crypto only goes back at best to 2018. That's really not historic, right? That's not long enough to know hitting a step. And there's just been so much change in the way crypto has touched finance that it's speculative at best of whether or not that cycle holds true anymore. I'm going to plan for the worst, and I'm going to hope for the best.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I wanted to just do a couple listener questions, and then we can wrap up. All right. Sure. So I've gotten my dad into crypto, and he's in his early 60s, right? And he's going through the same thing that I am, just really interested in trying to get as much information as he can into it. What would you recommend for someone who's in their 60s, near retirement age, as far as—
I love that your dad is in crypto. I actually just had a question from another parent who's in their 50s and 60s. And their question it blew me away, because most people in crypto are our age, or we're not really thinking about like estate planning. But it was perfect. And so this is what they asked me. They said, if I buy crypto, can I leave it to my heirs? And so great question that most young folks aren't thinking about. And so the answer to that is, while I'm not a lawyer and go get an accountant to help you with it, you absolutely can put your crypto in a trust, and that will keep it private. That'll keep it secure, right? Because if you have a will and you pass, that will has to go to probate. It becomes public record. You don't want your secure, sensitive crypto data, right? Your private keys or your brokerage info, because it's so anonymous that if any hacker gets that public data, your crypto is gone and there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to be very careful. But if you put it in a trust will be executed by the trustee. It does not have to go to probate. It does not become part of the public record. And so in your trust, you can reference your crypto assets and how they are to be distributed. And then you create a trustee, an accountant, a trusted, person that's not going to steal your data. And you leave the specific data in a memo with them. If you're on a hard wallet, your private keys and your access to the wallet. If you're on brokerages, your username and login to the brokerage, so that in the trust it says, I want my crypto assets divided evenly amongst my heirs, and reference that memo and the one person holding the memo for you, and then they can go execute the memo and give you the crypto. So that was no one, I don't think, has ever really thought that far ahead in crypto. It's really interesting though to see that's where we're at now in terms of mainstream adoption, where we've got folks that are thinking through the estate planning and they're investing in crypto. That's really wild. And so for someone that's 50, 60, 70 years old and they want to invest in crypto, I'd give them the exact same advice: utility, use case, good quality technology, industry disruption potential, and invest long-term for those great projects. But for the estate planning piece, Don't just write in your will, I have crypto, because that's not going to work well. Build a trust and put your crypto details in the trust. And so it's not public record. It keeps it private, keeps it secure, and your heirs can get it quickly. It doesn't have to go through probate. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. Next question. So for people who are, again, same age group, 50, 60, 70, behind on their retirement, maybe it's not too late to start an IRA, but maybe there's a better solution. What would you recommend for someone who is a little bit late to retirement?
That's always a tough one, because time is always going to be one of the biggest factors in wealth building. The only thing that you can say at that point, let's say you're 60, 65, and you're at retirement age and you're not quite where you want to be. The best thing you can do is continue to work a little bit longer, right? Delay your pleasure to build a little bit more. It's still great to put money into an IRA, let that mutual fund work for you. Real estate's fine too. The biggest piece of that is you gotta be mindful of your lifestyle expenses, right? So if you're in a larger house that you can downsize to save monthly mortgage costs, downsize. If you haven't paid off your debt and you still have car payments or credit card payments, absolutely tackle that stuff, because you don't want to have those payments affecting your ability to live your life when you retire. So get your financial house in order. And then it's still, I mean, traditional versus Roth, you could argue the difference there. We didn't really touch on that too much. Roth is great because it's pre-tax, so it's post-tax dollars, meaning your earnings are never taxed. But if you're already way over here and you're not going to have a lot of earnings, it doesn't help you as much to have a Roth versus a traditional, because you're not going to have as much earnings as you are contributions. There's some other benefits there for, we didn't talk about, but like the Roth, not that I'd ever recommend someone to do it, but if you're putting money into a Roth, your earnings will never be taxed when you pull it out, but you can actually take out your contributions at any point before retirement age without any penalties. So let's just say hypothetically, I've been putting 10 grand, every couple of years in my Roth, and I've got 50, 60, 70 grand of my contributions, but I'm 45 and some catastrophic life event happens and I need 35 grand to fix that catastrophic life event. I can actually go to my Roth and take my 35 grand that I've put in out. No penalties, no taxes, no issues. In a traditional, you can't do that. You have to wait until you're 59 and a half before you can start taking money out, or you get taxed and penalized for it. So there are some pros and cons to the Roth over traditional. When you're that far up in age, the Roth starts to lose its financial benefit simply because your contributions are what's tax-free, but your earnings are what's tax-free, but you may not have as much earnings because you're working on such a short time horizon. So the biggest things I would say is trim down your lifestyle, make sure that your living expenses are as minimal as they can be, so you can maximize the income you do have coming in your retirement.
And that's great. And that's actually, you kind of answered that question. So a lot of the questions I got from people were Roth versus traditional IRA. So you kind of answered that there. Is there anything else, since that is a question on the listener questions, is there anything else?
Yeah, let me hit on that. Absolutely. Let me touch on that for a minute. So if you're just getting started, the Roth is almost always going to be a better investment. You're going to pay the taxes on your money now before you invest them into the Roth. And then, compound interest doing what it does, that $1 million scenario that we talked about earlier, all of the earnings, which is the vast majority of what will be in your account when you're ready to retire, are completely tax-free, right? You don't pay anything on the earnings. Whereas with a traditional, you're not going to pay taxes right now. When you put it in, it's going to be pre-tax. So it's going to come right out of your paycheck into the account before they tax you. The problem is when you're ready to retire, you're now going to be taxed on the distributions at whatever your current tax level is. Most people, you could argue, will have a higher tax bracket later on in their life when they're ready to retire, because they've built up an income, they've built up investments and other things that have raised their tax basis. And so if I could pay taxes now when I'm young and I'm not making a ton, and I get that into an investment that will then be tax-free, as opposed to paying the taxes at the end when I've got a higher tax bracket, financially, the Roth typically makes more sense for folks. Now, functionally, there are some similarities and there's some differences. The one I talked about already, a Roth, you can actually take your contributions out penalty-free if you need to. I don't recommend it because you'll short circuit that compound interest. But in the event of a catastrophic event and you really need the cash, that's an option for you. Traditional, you have to wait till you're 59 and a half before you can start doing that, or you get penalized and you get taxed. The other cool thing about a Roth is there are no required minimum distributions, meaning, let's say Walt Key is doing okay, and my Roth when I'm 65 or 70 is worth millions, but I don't need it. I got real estate, I got crypto, whatever, right? I just don't need the money. I can leave my Roth to my heirs. They can inherit it, and I will have never had to take any of it out. And that's a pretty cool deal. With a traditional, you are required to start taking minimum distributions when you hit age 72, whether you want to or not, whether you need to or not, they will require you to start taking some out. So let's say I'm 72 and I start taking out and taking out and taking out, but I'm a rock star and I'm healthy and I'm eating my oatmeal. I live till 100. Well, I've spent 30 years taking money out of it. Now what I get to leave to my heirs is less because I had to take it out. So the Roth is kind of cool in that regard too. Now, if you do leave your Roth to your heirs, they will then have minimum distribution requirements and they will have to take some out, but it's still not taxable to them. And you were able to give them far more than you would have in a traditional had you lived longer than you thought. So that's another cool thing about it. Some of the things are the same. The amount you can put in are the same for each one. So right now it's $6,000 a year, $7,000 if you're over a certain age. And so every now and then, usually every few years, the IRS will bump that number up because inflation and everything else. So they'll move the number up. But as of right now, $6,000 is the maximum you can put into a Roth or a traditional in any given year. The other thing that's worth noting, if you're a high income individual, you will technically not be able to do a Roth once you're married making over 208,000, or if you're a single individual making 140,000, your income is too high to qualify for the Roth. There is a perfectly legal tax loophole. And so anyone who can Google this can read up on it. It's not complex. It's called a backdoor Roth. If you make too much money to be able to open a Roth, you can actually open a traditional IRA and then convert it to a Roth, pay the taxes immediately, and have a Roth. So that's called a backdoor IRA. It is perfectly legal. It's not any sort of crazy scam. It's just the way that the tax code is written allows you to do that. So those are a couple of pros and cons, a couple of contrasts to the Roth versus the traditional. And then if you're a business, right, the SEP IRA is great too, because the SEP, you can put in substantially more money. That might work out great if you're older, but you're still earning money, especially if you're in real estate or you've got a business where you can justify opening a SEP. A Roth IRA, 6,000 is the most, 7,000 if you're older. Well, a SEP IRA, I can put up to 25% of however much money I make into a SEP every year. And so if I'm trying to catch up and get myself in a position where I want to be able to retire and start living off my interest, the SEP will put a whole lot more money into the retirement account quicker, just simply because of the amount you can put into it.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think that's something to think about now is, the Roth IRA is what everyone's been recommending to me. And that's what I did. But eventually
Absolutely.
I would love to have a SEP IRA. And it is okay to have both, correct? You can have
Absolutely. Yeah,
both.
you can totally have both.
Absolutely.
Totally
That's
have
good
both.
to know.
Yeah.
Walt,
And then within that, one more, if I could, real quick,
yeah,
one more point.
Of course.
Because I want to make sure people understand. So we talk about Roth, we talk about SEP, we talk about traditional IRAs. It's important to understand that those are not the investment. Those are simply the tax advantaged or not advantaged account in which the investment is there. So those are simply really the blanket that covers the investment based on how the tax code is written. Within those accounts is where you put the investment. So you still need to do the research and find good quality growth stock mutual funds or whatever fund you're interested in. Do the research, break those out, go to morningstar.com and do some research on mutual funds. You can put the same mutual fund in a traditional as you can a Roth. It's just how they're treated with the taxes that's different. So I just want to make sure people understand that. You can put a lot of investments into both of those engines.
What do you think about robo-managed accounts versus professionally managed accounts versus self-managed accounts?
So I get that question a lot with investing. People like, well, I wrote a bot. I'm like, that's not my thing. I like people. I'm pretty hands-on with my investments. Like I told my brokerage, this is the mutual fund that I want. I did the research. I found the fund. I want that one. And why is that? Well, one, not every mutual fund manager is created equal, right? And just like in real estate, right? Not every real estate agent is created equal. Some are better than others. Some are lazier than others. No one's going to manage your money better than you because you're the one that has the vested interest. If you don't know a lot about mutual funds, how to look at them, what am I after? What's a good 15, 20, 30-year track record? What does that even look like? Then by all means, find an investment manager, go to Charles Schwab, go to TD Ameritrade, go to Edward Jones, and find someone that will manage it for you, but also teach you along the way. Don't trust your money to someone just because they have a license to tell you about money. That's not a good idea. So like I have two mutual funds specifically that I researched many mutual funds, and I told I use Edward Jones, and I have TD Ameritrade for an UTMA for my 8-year-old who has an investment brokerage account. He's going to do real well.
Yeah.
So I found the mutual funds that I wanted based on researching them and seeing which ones are beating the benchmarks, which ones are beating the market. And then I said, I want my money in my Roth going into that mutual fund. I want my money in my SEP going to that mutual fund, just to get a little diversification, right? A mutual fund is great because it already is pretty diverse. I have two because I like them both, and it's a little bit more diversity. And they both are, rock star accounts. I mean, they're both earning, the 15-year track record are well over 10%, which is hard to find, but they're out there. And so the more interest you can get, obviously the better, but you got to look long term. You don't look at a mutual fund that's been around for 5 years and their 3-year track record is great. Look for mutual funds that have been around for decades and have a long-term track record of being managed well and returning that money. Because so much changes in the investment world that a 2 to 3 year track record, if we have a really good market, doesn't really tell you much. You need long-term.
Right. Yeah, stability for sure. Walt, is there any last advice you want to give? And also, where can people find you? Obviously, your YouTube channel. We're going to make sure we put that in the notes.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go to my YouTube channel, again, it's fledgling. I'm at like 45 subs. I just got this thing started. I usually put all my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord channel. I pop that in the about section of the videos. And so if anyone finds my YouTube channel, they can grab me on social. I'm actually really easy to find because my name is Walter. And most people that are in the technology space are not named Walter. It's an older name. So if they Google Walt Key or Walt Key Realtor, you're going to find my data. I'm easy to find. So, but I'm on it. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I've got a little Discord channel that a buddy of mine are doing. You can find me just about anywhere.
Perfect. And yeah, I'll make sure that I will we'll put those in the notes so people can find you a little bit easier. Anything else you want to tell people?
No, invest, right? Invest in you, regardless of what you're investing in, whether it's crypto, it's stocks, it's real estate, mutual funds. Think long term. What would the 65-year-old you wish the 20-year-old you would have done, and start doing it? Even if you're 30, do the thing that you would have told the 20-year-old to do. And, risk, a lot of people talk about investment advice, risk. Risk is nothing more than a metric of time in my mind. If you're 70 and you plan to retire at 72, you can't assume a lot of risk. Got it. But if you're 20, if you're 30, even if you're 40, you can assume some risk to get longer term gains. High risk, high reward is pretty standard. But yes, you might lose 30% in a really bad year in the stock market. But over the course of 10 years, you are going to gain substantially more than putting your money into a bond or a treasury bill or, something that's just not going to do enough for you to get you where you want to be. So it's okay to assume a little risk. It is perfectly fine to get out of your comfort level a little bit, try some new things, and let time work in your favor, because it always will. Start early.
Walt, thank you so much for coming on. We'll have you back on for sure, and we'll talk more about the finance industry and what we can do. Once we stop recording here, I'll get your address. I'm going to send you a challenge coin for the podcast. And like I said, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it here. And we will link up soon. Let me go ahead and All right, guys, that is all for today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and got something out of it. You know, I'm going to be sure and link Walt's YouTube channel to the show notes so you guys can go watch his videos. I went down the rabbit hole this week and watched all but 1 or 2 videos. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. And so depending on how much time you have, you can put one on, get something that you can take away and use that day or whenever you're ready to make those financial decisions. If you can, please support the podcast by sharing it with your friends and liking it on social media. That really is the best way to help me right now. On Instagram, it's the ReFounded Project. On Facebook, it's the ReFounded Project. And on Twitter, it's ReFounded Proj. I'm going to try and do better about posting every day. It's something I suck at, but I will work on it. I hope you guys have a kick-ass week. Thank you so much for listening. You know, we're 4 episodes into the podcast, and I love doing this. Even if nobody listened to this thing, this is what I would still be doing because I get something out of it, and I'm hoping that you guys are getting something out as well. So, enjoy your week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode.